I'm happy to welcome back to the program Avik Roy. He is the president of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity and a senior advisor to the Bipartisan Policy Center. Avik, how's it going?
Hey, Stu, how are you?
Really well.
Interesting day.
Yeah, really interesting day. I don't think people realize what a big deal this is. I've been talking about cryptocurrency for a long time. I think it's a really interesting thing. And one of these things that kind of has always been dangling out there in the future was a thought that at some point, some small country, maybe with an economy that's not so stable and wanting to change things up and invite investment, would adopt Bitcoin as part of their real economy. And it seems like this is actually happening.
Yeah, I think, in terms of the Bitcoin story or the cryptocurrency story more broadly, this is the most important development of the year and possibly of the decade. This is something, as you alluded to, Stu, that people didn't expect to happen for another 10 years, for a sovereign country to adopt Bitcoin as its national currency, to effectively implement a Bitcoin standard like the gold standards of the old days. So this is a huge development. And it's going to have huge consequences for the global financial system, because all it takes is one country to pilot this and prove that it can be done for a lot of other countries to want to do it in the future.
It really is amazing. And you have an article called El Salvador, by the way, that's the country, El Salvador to make Bitcoin legal tender, a milestone in monetary history. It's a great, if you want to understand this from the beginning to the end, you go through this story. You point out, in a way, yes, El Salvador is doing this, but in a way, it's a result of the United States and the actions we've taken over the past year. Can you explain this?
Absolutely. So one of the most important reasons why El Salvador looked at this as an important step is because right now, El Salvador's official currency is the U.S. dollar. In fact, the El Salvador government imports freshly printed U.S. dollars from the Federal Reserve to supply its own citizens with U.S. dollars. So a lot of Latin American countries have been through currency crises and hyperinflation crises in the past, where their currency basically crashed. Venezuela, this has happened to Venezuela recently. A lot of mismanagement of currencies. So there was a trend a few decades ago of countries adopting the U.S. dollar and saying, you know what, we're just going to, since almost all of our trades with the U.S., let's, instead of our own currency, hitch our wagon to the U.S. The U.S. has a stable monetary policy. There's very low inflation. We can count on that. Let's just stick to that. But what's happened since COVID is very different from that pattern, where all of a sudden, over the last 15 months, we've had this massive fiscal blowout where the government is spending trillions and trillions of dollars paid for by nothing, basically. Mm-hmm. And then in order to fund that newly issued federal debt, the Federal Reserve is printing U.S. dollars out of thin air to buy that excess debt that the rest of the world market doesn't want. And so if you're El Salvador, you're like, well, wait a minute. Those dollars are flowing to U.S. banks. Those dollars are flowing to U.S. institutions. They're not flowing to us. All we're seeing is the dollars that we hold have less purchasing power today than they did before. And they're like, we need to make sure that we have a hedge in case there's more inflation in the U.S. and less purchasing power for us.
This is really, really incredible. And it's funny because, Bitcoin in many ways was created to fight off problems like this. And now it's becoming a currency for a nation because of those types of things, bailouts and printing and everything else. Can you tell us a little bit about the leadership of El Salvador? Why are they the ones doing this?
Yeah, so the president of El Salvador is a guy named Nayib Bukele. He's the son of a Palestinian businessman who emigrated to El Salvador. He's 39 or 40 years old, young guy, millennials, fond of wearing a baseball cap backwards. So a young guy, as we know, Bitcoin and crypto tends to be a thing that younger people in the U.S. and around the world are more interested in because they've grown up in their adult lives have been basically surrounded by financial dislocation and crises. So they're much more interested in this stuff, interested in an alternative to the current system. He formed a new party a couple of years ago called Nuevas Ideas, or New Ideas, that basically has a 2/3 majority in the legislature in what they call the National Assembly, and then he's the president. So he's pretty popular. He has 90% approval ratings by independent pollsters, young guy trying to shake things up. And because his party also has this large majority, once he proposed this bill, the likelihood was pretty high that it would pass. And in fact, they shipped it over to the Assembly last night, and it passed with a 3-to-1 majority. Almost 3/4 of the Assembly voted in favor. It will go into effect in 90 days.
Really incredible. And so what does this actually mean for the country? I mean, they still are going to keep the U.S. dollar, at least that's my understanding, but Bitcoin you can use it at every store. I mean, it's really going to be that widespread?
Yeah, so that was a key thing that they specified. There were a lot of questions after the initial announcement at the Bitcoin conference in Miami of what exactly does this mean that you're going to declare Bitcoin legal tender? Because normally what that means is it's a currency, just like the U.S. dollar. You can use it for paying your taxes, you can use it for paying interest at the bank, and you can use it to buy your groceries, right? And the question was he really going to go that far? And in fact, that's what the bill says. The bill actually specifically says every economic agent in El Salvador has to accept Bitcoin as payment. Now, in order to smooth out some of the volatility of Bitcoin, what the country has done is actually very sophisticated. They've actually said, we're going to build this back end where if somebody pays you in Bitcoin and you don't want to hold Bitcoin yourself because you're worried that it goes up and down all the time, we're going to build a $150 million trust, the government of El Salvador that will buy your Bitcoin off of you and give you U.S. dollars at the current market price. And that way, you don't have to hold Bitcoin if you don't want to. But if you want to, you're welcome to. And if over time Bitcoin appreciates relative to the U.S. dollar, you're probably going to win with that trade.
Very true. So one of the things that's interesting about this is that I think around the world, we've seen certain areas signal positive intent with Bitcoin, and some signal negative intent. I think we're seeing this around the country now, where Miami, for example, the mayor there is constantly inviting people, talking to people about Bitcoin, talking about crypto, having conferences there and everything else. Where you see, I would say Biden, certainly Janet Yellen seemed negative. Donald Trump just the other day was on television saying it was basically a scam and it was competing with U.S. currency, and he didn't like it. When a country like El Salvador signals something like this could make a really big difference for foreign investment and for people just moving there with lots of money.
Well, all of the above. I think what's been kind of interesting about this whole thing is, the Bitcoin community, one of the things you hear a lot about Bitcoin is, well, I don't know about Bitcoin. I think if it ever gets too big and too successful, the U.S. government will ban it. Right? That's been one of the concerns or fears or skepticism that's been out there. Well, it's a lot harder to ban if it's the sovereign currency of a freestanding country, right? If the U.S. is to say, well, because we don't like Bitcoin, we're going to treat El Salvador the way we treat Iran and basically prevent them from interacting with the global economy, that would be a pretty extraordinary level of interference by the United States at this moment. I mean, yes, historically the U.S. has done plenty of things in Latin America, but in terms of this moment post-Iraq, the idea that we're going to go through those lengths to prevent El Salvador from having its own currency, that would be pretty hard to understand. And I think a lot of American voters would be like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Right. Yeah. So I just don't see any appetite in the government for that. And so that's really important, because that in and of itself creates a haven for Bitcoin. Right here in the U.S., as you said, Janet Yellen doesn't like it. She thinks it's fake internet money. Jay Powell doesn't like it. The SEC and various regulators are always complaining about it. So a lot of people who are tech entrepreneurs, Bitcoin entrepreneurs, crypto entrepreneurs in this country are like, why am I here? Why am I doing all this in America when I don't even know if America is behind me when I'm trying to deliver this innovation to the country? You have a country like El Salvador saying, you're welcome over here. Come over with everything you got, and we'll welcome you with open arms and allow you to not only build your businesses here, but you will not pay any taxes because Bitcoin is the local currency. So there's nothing to actually gain. One Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, regardless of what it does relative to the US dollar. So that is going to, and people just want that sense of endorsement, right? I think the Bitcoin community, the crypto community craves that sense of, we're not these outsiders, we're not these misfits, we're actually people building real enterprises and new financial institutions that are more inclusive than the old ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think it seems really exciting. I will say I'm very excited about this, and I have, it does seem like a massive development. Have you put thought into the idea, though, that this could actually be somewhat difficult to implement? And could there be problems? The thought popped into my head of, like, you've got your whole Bitcoin, balance on your phone. Who knows what kind of criminal, sort of elements could end. There's a lot of corruption in Central America, as we know. Is there a thought that this could go badly and then other countries aren't going to want to do it?
That's certainly something to pay attention to. But I think what's really impressive about the El Salvador project is how well that's all been thought through. So one of the things a lot of people don't know, obviously El Salvador has just popped into the news this weekend on this topic, but people in El Salvador have been building Bitcoin native communities for a long time. There's a famous experiment called Bitcoin Beach, where basically a bunch of crypto entrepreneurs moved to this beachfront area called El Zante, a surf town in El Salvador, and basically with some philanthropic donations built this community of people who got paid in Bitcoin, shopped for their groceries in Bitcoin, paid for their surfing lessons in Bitcoin. And it was that experiment that's been going on for several years and has been working that actually emboldened the Salvadoran government to take that pilot project nationwide. So they've actually solved a lot of these problems already. And the way their Bitcoin system will work is, if you go to a grocery store and you want to pay $1 for a bag of tomatoes and it's $1 in USD, you send the money with your app, kind of like you would with the Square app or the Venmo app or something like that. And the money is transmitted from you to the grocer in Bitcoin, but it can be instantly converted back to US dollars if that's what you want. If you don't want to hold the Bitcoin on your balance sheet or in your account, you can convert it back to dollars. And in fact, what President Bukele said last night is that the Salvadoran government is going to be establishing a $150 million trust that will buy the Bitcoins off of you and give you US dollars in exchange at the market rates so that you don't have to hold the Bitcoin on your balance sheet. So they've been thinking this through, and there's an exemption to the requirement that you have to accept Bitcoin if you live in a place that doesn't have broadband or you don't have a smartphone for some reason. So they're trying to basically say, look, we're gonna make sure that everyone has access to the technology, and if you don't, we're gonna give you some time to get adapted to it. And we're going to do all the things we need to do to support the 70% of the Salvadoran population that doesn't have bank accounts today. So this is a massive step for including those individuals into the financial system who don't have bank accounts today. And it's going to do a lot, I think, to reduce crime, because you know what the best tool for crime is? Paper US dollars, right? That you stick in a suitcase and you give to someone, because no one can trace that. Bitcoin transactions can be traced. That's why the FBI was able to nail the Colonial Pipeline hackers just recently, right? That announcement came out yesterday, the day before, because Bitcoin transactions all get sent like an email from one address to another address to another address. And if you're pretty sophisticated about tracking that, you can track where the money goes. So I would actually bet that corruption in El Salvador will decline as a result of adopting Bitcoin, not the other way around.
Yeah, people always think that Bitcoin's this really secretive. I mean, if you want a privacy coin, there's Zcash, there's Monero, there are options in that world, but Bitcoin isn't like that exactly. I mean, there are privacy elements to it. But as soon as you know the address, you can track lots of stuff when it comes to Bitcoin. One more thing, Avik, before I let you go, and this is me just with a good old burst of American exceptionalism here. And I feel like I'm being dinged a little bit in my American exceptionalism. As I see, I've been thinking about this report that came out from ProPublica this week, where they are going after all these rich people, these evil rich people, for not paying enough taxes. We seem to have come to a point in America where we vilify people who are the creators, who are the people who have earned lots of money, and they might be wealthy, but they've brought a lot to the country and to the economy. And here's El Salvador doing the exact opposite. They're saying, hey, we want you, if you're innovative, if you're thinking in a different way, we want you to come here. And I just don't like how El Salvador is outdoing the United States in a way here.
I think there's very good potential that 10 years from now, Stu, if we're sitting at this table, virtually or in person, that we're going to be saying that El Salvador is an economically freer country than the United States. That's the tipping point that we're now at, where you file your tax returns with the Internal Revenue Service, you have zero assurance that those tax returns are staying confidential in some IRS file cabinet, right? They're all digital. They can be unlocked by who knows how many people, or even disclosed in a hack. And yet you have the Biden administration saying, we actually want to give the IRS more power to basically vacuum up every single transaction you make with your bank accounts and your credit cards, so that we can track every single thing you do and make sure you're paying exactly what you need to be paying in taxes. That's what the Biden administration wants to do. And I guarantee you, if that happens, then there will be no privacy left in the United States. And I think a lot of people will want to move to places like El Salvador, where even though Bitcoin is traceable, you have a lot more privacy under that system than you have under ours.
Well, I feel like this is a positive story. I'm really excited about it. I hate to end it on sort of a down note, but maybe this is a wake-up call for the United States.
Let me give you the positive spin. And the positive spin is this, okay? Think about all the people who are moving from San Francisco to Texas, or from New York to Miami, because those places are welcoming to businesses and have a zero state income tax, right? That's a form of competition, jurisdictional competition. People moving from a high tax jurisdiction to a low tax jurisdiction. And it inspires other states to lower their taxes to lure those people back, right? Something similar can be true of the US dollar and Bitcoin. If Latin America, if other places become places where the currency does better because it can't be inflated away like the Federal Reserve is doing with the US dollar, maybe that helps the US government realize that it needs to strengthen the US dollar, make it more of a store of value to bring those people back and retain the people we already have.
Well, as someone watching the Texas housing market, I can tell you that, yes, there's a lot of people making those decisions right now. There's some good news. Avik Roy, president of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity and senior advisor to the Bipartisan Policy Center. Avik, thanks so much for coming on the program. I appreciate it.
Thanks, too.